some pictures that I've been finding as we've been unpacking, and the girls happened to find a prom picture that Matt had with another girl. They were shocked. Then I had to explain to them, you know, I also dated a couple other boys before I met your father. They're not happy about it. But now they know that I too had one or two boyfriends. But, you know, it was before we met each other, so you can't blame us. One of those boys, I met while working in high school at a restaurant as a hostess. He worked there also. We'll call him Andrew. Andrew was tall and handsome and charming and knew how to make a girl feel special. He was good with sweet talking. One evening while we were working together, and there was a lull in the rush, Andrew turned to me, looked me deep in the eyes, and almost whispered, "I love you." I said, "You love me? What does that mean?" Well, then Andrew was relieved for a few minutes because there was a crowd of people who suddenly wanted to be seated. He was rescued momentarily, but we were going to have that conversation. And when we did, he confessed that that was his line. You see, he never wanted to be the first one to tell a girl that he loved her. So he would say, "I love you," hoping the girl would misunderstand and then reply, "I love you." And then the girl would be the first to say that L word, the real L word, and not him. And he could choose how he wanted to respond. Did he want to say, "Oh, yeah, I love you like a friend," or whatever he actually wanted? It gave into his being a little bit of a coward and his power and all that fun stuff that were reasons of why I married Matt. But that conversation was something I was reminded of when I read the gospel this morning, because a similar conversation is going on. And it also brings up some important questions for us to think about. Do we love Jesus, or do we love Jesus? And what does that even mean anyway? Well, where we begin reading today in John, according to the gospel, Easter has happened. Jesus met Mary Magdalene where she was at, weeping outside the tomb. And her tears were dried, and he sent her out to preach the good news of the resurrection. And then later on, he met up with some of his other disciples who were in a dark and locked room because they were scared of what might happen to them. He met them where they were at. And once they realized that Mary Magdalene had been right the whole time, they rejoiced. But one of them hadn't been with them, and so Jesus came back a third time, where they were still locked in that dark room. But this time he met Thomas where he was at and showed him his hands and his side. And they rejoiced. But now, where we begin reading, Jesus isn't with them at the moment. And for this group of disciples, instead of running out and telling everyone they know that Jesus is alive, they decide to go fishing at night, in the dark. You know, how you do when your Lord and teacher and friend who you watched died has now appeared to you in the flesh, but isn't with you at the moment, so you're a little confused. So what do? You go fishing at night in the dark. And they fished all night. And surprise, they didn't catch anything. But then, in the light of the sunrise, Jesus met them where they were at, on the beach, and gave them this brilliant idea to try putting the nets on the other side of the boat. And they didn't have anything to lose, so they did what this seemingly stranger was telling them, because why not? And then they saw these fish just leaping into their nets. And when they saw the abundance, they recognized Jesus, who gives us grace upon grace. And Peter got all excited and put on some clothes, because that's a good thing to do sometimes, and jumped in the water and swam to Jesus, leaving the others behind to do all the heavy lifting. And Jesus was there waiting. He didn't really need any of their fish because he already had fish that he was barbecuing for them for breakfast. And he invited them and gathered them and fed them. And then it was time for Jesus and Peter to have the talk. You know that talk. Most of us have had it. The one where you figure out where this relationship's really going. How committed are you? And just who are you deep down? Are you who you think you are? And I'm sure when Jesus pulled Peter aside, Peter must have been wondering, does Jesus know about how just a few days before Peter had denied being one of Jesus' disciples? In John's gospel, it's not so much that that Peter denies knowing Jesus. It's that Peter denies his own identity as being a follower of Christ. And that's what this conversation is about. And Jesus takes Peter aside and asks him, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me more than anyone and anything? And I imagine that Peter looked Jesus deep in the eyes and sort of whispered, I love you. Okay, maybe he didn't say love, but you have to understand that in the Greek, Jesus uses the word agape when he says, do you love me? Agape means, do you love me unconditionally, no matter what? And Peter replies with the Greek word for phileo, which means brotherly love, friendship love, which is still love, and it's still important. But it's not quite the same, is it? So a second time, Jesus turns to Peter and asks him, do you love me with your whole heart? And a second time, Peter answers, I love you like a friend. I love you like a brother. I love you. Now, that night, just right in between Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, when it was dark out, Peter had denied his identity 3 times. So Jesus asks Peter a 3rd time. But this time, he meets Peter where he is at. And he asks him, do you love me like a brother? Do you love me like a friend? Do you love me? And Peter says, yes. And so then Jesus charges Peter. He says, if you mean what you say, if you really love me like a brother, if you really love me like a friend, this is who you are. And Jesus reinstates Peter's identity and tells him to get ready. Because he's got some things to do. He will be going places and doing things and need to be ready to give up his life for Jesus. It matters to Jesus, but Jesus is still able to work with Peter saying, I filio you. Because Jesus can do that. Jesus can turn, in John's Gospel, water into an abundance of wine. He can turn a couple of loaves of bread and just a few fish into enough to feed 5,000 people. He can turn empty nets into overflowing nets with 153 fish. Somebody counted. He can take Peter's filial love and transform it into agape love. This is Peter's call story to become a shepherd to Jesus' sheep. That night, a few nights back, Peter had lost himself, and now, in the morning light, he is found. And his job is no longer to go out and fish in the middle of the night, but to take care of sheep. To tend Jesus' sheep, to feed his sheep. And there may be a part of us who hear that, and in the back of our minds, we kind of go on this little tangent. I don't know if any of you do this, but where you say, okay, he's got to go tend sheep now. Well, which sheep? Any of you go there? What sheep does Peter need to tend? Because we want to qualify who we have to care for, who we have to bother about, who we need to live into Jesus' mandate from Maundy Thursday, from the Last Supper, when Jesus said, agape others as I agape you. And throughout John's Gospel, we know the answer. We know how we have been called, just as Peter has been called, and we know who to. Because Jesus has told us that God so loves the world, all the sheep in the world. In other places in John's Gospel, he tells us that he has other sheep, not of this fold, not part of our flock. sheep who don't look like us, sheep who don't speak like us, sheep who don't love like us, or worship like us, or vote like us, or live like us. All those sheep too. We, like Peter, are called to tend and feed these sheep. This is a part of who we are. And in this morning light, just like Peter, our identity has been reinstated. When we gave thanksgiving for our baptism, it reinstated our identity, where we remember how God claimed us and named us as God's loved children. And our identity is reinstated as we are called forward to be fed, to have a meal in the morning with the risen Christ. You see, we are people of the resurrection. We have experienced Easter. And even though there may be times where we forget who we are and whose we are, even if there may be days where we lose our way, or we just don't feel like ourselves, no matter how hard we try. Even if there may be moments where we wonder if we love Jesus or if we love Jesus, Jesus comes to us in the light, meeting us where we're at. And he pulls us out of our dark places and shines so brightly, calling us to be shepherds, calling us to all those sheep, the 99 and the 100 lost sheep, calling us to go find those other sheep and to tend to them, to welcome them, to gather them, to feed them in that same agape, no matter what way that Jesus has for us. Amen.